All right, we are here in Athens, Greece. I've got sitting next to me the one and only Oracle of Athens, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, let's talk about Ukraine. What is on the table? What is going on in Ukraine? Zaporozhye, nuclear power plant. What else?
Kherson, the offensive that hasn't happened, the Russian counteroffensive to Nikolaev, all sorts of things going on in Ukraine. Now, can I just say, before I start, it's absolutely great being here in Athens, together with Alex, and here we are, we're doing a video together. It's a long time, but let's get on with our topic.
Where do we start? Where Zaporozhye?
Let's start with the Zaporozhye power station.
Cui bono?
Cui bono? Well, this is one of the most bizarre stories, because somebody is shelling a nuclear power station. The Russians control this nuclear power station. Why would the Russians shell themselves in a nuclear power station? Yet I read in British media, American media, from the International Atomic Energy Agency, convoluted discussions trying to avoid an explanation, an admission of who is obviously shelling a nuclear power station. Now, to me it's obvious. To me it's absolute no-brainer. It has to be Ukraine. The Ukrainians must be shelling this nuclear power station. But why deny it?
What are the reasons Ukraine says that the Russians are doing it? Like, what are the reasons that they're giving for or have they given any reasons?
I'm not sure they are giving any reasons. What they're saying is that the Russians have turned this power station into some great army base, that there's Russian troops there, that there's Russian, weapon systems there, that the Russians are using the Zaporozhye nuclear power station as cover, and the Ukrainians are also saying that because this is so strongly and powerfully built nuclear power station, if they shell it, there's little risk of any major accident happening. So I don't think the Ukrainians are really seriously denying that it is they who are shelling this nuclear power station. And yet, the media, governments in the West, the IAEA, are trying to avoid a straightforward admission of this. And I was just going to talk about this Kherson counteroffensive, which
the IAEA, the
International Atomic Energy Agency,
right.
the people who are supposed to supervise and monitor these things. And can I just say, if the Russians are using this power station, this nuclear power station, as an army base, it's wrong and it's bad, but there is a way of finding out. You get the inspectors from the IAEA to actually go there, and they check it out, and they do a report, and that will embarrass the Russians, and either they will stay, in which case they'll be even more embarrassed, or they will leave. But that's the way you deal with this, not by lobbing shells at it. That seems to me to be completely the wrong way of approaching this. And I actually think, personally, that Western governments and Western media are actually becoming very embarrassed about this, because I notice that they're not saying it's not the Ukrainians who are shelling this power station. They're just avoiding saying who obviously is shelling this power station. And if I could just bring in now the Kherson counteroffensive, The Guardian tried to link these two stories together, and it said that the reason why Ukraine is not carrying out this counteroffensive is because this power station, nuclear power station, is somehow in the way, and that if they launch a counteroffensive towards southwestern Ukraine, because this nuclear power station is garrisoned by the Russians, that somehow prevents the Ukrainians from launching this counteroffensive. Now, I don't get this because, I'm not a person who's good at maths or good at strategy. But I've seen where this power station is, and I've seen where Kherson is, and I can't see the connection between the two at all.
Just to clarify, the Guardian is saying that the reason Russia's doing this is so that they can stop the Kherson counteroffensives.
Yes.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, I mean, that was what that article seemed to be saying. It was, makes it a little bit more ambiguous, but that was what they were saying. And again, it just doesn't make any kind of sense to me. I mean, to be straightforward about this, Ukraine recently has been doing things which I consider more and more reckless and more desperate. Now, I'm going to be very careful what I say, because you're getting all kinds of people like the British Ministry of Defence now weighing in and saying, well, it's not the Ukrainians who are doing this, it's the Russians. So it's the Russians who are laying anti-personnel mines, for example. I mean, there's actually a British Military of Defence bulletin who's saying this. I think Ukraine is getting more and more reckless. They're attacking more and more places that they shouldn't be attacking, launching missiles at more and more infrastructure, and doing things which, in my opinion, are coming very close now to having legal consequences if they're identified as doing it. And I have to say, launching these attacks on this nuclear power station looks to me to be one of those things. I think what Ukraine is trying to do is that they're worried that Western interest is flagging in the war, that things are not going well for them. So they think the way we are going to attract attention is we're going to start shelling a nuclear power station, and that will make people more interested and more worried about the war, and they might, start doing more on our behalf to try and help us. I think it's a reckless strategy, but it's the only explanation for this very bizarre behavior that I can see.
Okay, so you mentioned the Kherson counteroffensive. I've been getting reports that the Zelensky regime is now moving forces in Kiev, including wounded soldiers who are not ready to go back to the front lines. They're now moving those military assets to Donbass, while they're also moving a lot of military assets to Kherson.
Yes.
It seems like, it's kind of like they're moving from here to there and then from there to here. Is that true?
It is absolutely. I don't think there's any dispute about this. I think this is absolutely true. There was a very interesting article in Forbes which said that Ukraine's tank forces are now stretched incredibly thin, that Ukraine doesn't have enough tank troops, tank forces to build up an armoured fist in all the various front lines. So they're obliged to draw as many troops from as many places as they can. They're juggling with forces to try and close the gaps in Donbass, and at the same time build up some kind of strike force in Kherson region and prevent the Russian pressure in Kharkiv. And one wonders how long they can keep on doing that.
Well, the next logical question becomes, as Russia grinds down these forces, which I believe they inevitably will, it doesn't leave anything to stop the Russians from just moving all as far west as they want.
Well, I think this is exactly the point, and I think this is where I think a lot of people who look at this from a military point of view, and I always say I'm not a military person, but I've seen military people saying this. They are baffled by this strategy, because what Ukraine is doing is it's expending its forces. And when we talk about expending its forces, these are flesh and blood people. These are actual human beings who are being thrown into battle. Some of them old. Their conscription limits are now up to people who are 70 years old. They're recruiting women. They're recruiting pensioners. They're sending people who are not properly recovered from wounds back into the battle. But they're not using these reserves that they're building up to hold defendable places. They're throwing them to close the gaps in their already overextended battle lines. And there is a view that the right thing for Ukraine to do would be to pull back, try to create a new defence line, perhaps on the Dnieper River, except that most of eastern Ukraine is lost, that it's going to be impossible to hold on. But at least that way, you can keep Ukraine together, and then there'll be something perhaps left to move forward, either to negotiate with or to do something like that. But that's not what they're doing. Instead, they're trying to hold every millimetre of territory. They're trying to hold on to territory in Donbass, which they're losing, and the information there is horrendous. That's where the real grinding that you're talking about, that the Russians are doing, that's where it's really happening. And we hear now that, the fighting in a city called Bakhmut, which is now the focal point of this fighting, is becoming incredibly intense. And the Ukrainians are suffering huge losses there. They're talking about this offensive in Kherson, and in fact, if anything, they've been thrown onto the defensive there, because the Russians over the last few days have concentrated, some people say up to 25,000 men, 35,000 men in this area, and they're launching missile strikes, and there's reports that some Ukrainian units are refusing to go on the attack because they're suffering losses. But they still want to launch this counteroffensive in Kherson region, and they're even also trying to plug gaps in and around Kharkiv. Now, one of the greatest generals in history, Frederick the Great, once said, if you defend everything, you defend nothing. What Ukraine is at risk of doing, or so it seems to me, is of defending nothing. Going back to your question, if you're going to throw all your people, even these old people and wounded people, to the battle lines, overextended battle lines, when these battle lines are broken, when the Russians break through, there'll be nothing to stop the Russians going all the way to the Dnieper and beyond, because all your reserves, all your manpower, all your best trained troops, they'll have been thrown away.
Right. Yeah. Brian at the New Atlas talked about the Forbes article with the tanks as well, and I think it's pretty much the same conclusions that you're making as well. So yeah. To wrap up the video, we had an interesting email from a viewer that you mentioned there might be some validity to this, what this email suggested, what they posited, which was to keep a lookout for the exchange rate of the Hryvnia to the dollar and the ruble to the dollar.
Yes.
And the point that the viewer was making is that once they get close to parity, there we will definitely see the end of all of this. We're going to see the true unraveling of everything, from social to military to economic. Can you explain the logic there real quick, and why this may be something that everyone, including ourselves, has kind of overlooked? Because I was looking at the exchange rate, by the way. It was around, I think it was 39 or 40 hryvnias to the dollar, and the ruble's at about 56 or 58 to the dollar.
Yeah, the ruble at the moment is at a rate of between 56 to 60. It's sort of keeping fairly stable, and has been fairly stable for some weeks. The hryvnia, by contrast, is weakening. And it's not surprising, because all the indications are that Ukraine is now in the early stages of an inflation crisis. They're not getting much tax revenue coming in. The costs of keeping up the war are huge, even with all the Western financial support they're getting. And bear in mind, the United States apparently is paying all the wages of all the soldiers, which is astonishing. And they're paying the wages of most of the higher civil servants. But of course, that's only part of what a government does. Government does lots of different things. It has to pay all kinds of things which the West can't cover. So Ukraine says they said earlier they needed $5 billion a month to balance the budget. Now they're talking about $10 billion. That's what I read somewhere. The only way they can do it, because of course they're now in a default position. They've defaulted on their debts. Their national gas company, Naftogaz, has also defaulted. The only way they can keep all of these payments running is by printing money. That's going to put further downward pressure on the hryvnia. That's also going to stir up inflation. Now, when you get to a situation when the hryvnia and the ruble are at parity as opposed to the dollar, now bear in mind that Russian salaries, real salaries, are much higher than Ukrainian salaries. I mean, they're multiples stronger already. But once you get to the situation where it's parity, well, then it becomes incredibly easy for the Russians, in effect, to pay everything, to buy the whole of Ukraine up. And in fact, at that point, Ukrainians will look at the situation. They'll compare their hryvnia, which are depreciating, with the ruble, which is stable. They will see that they're trading in parity. There will be this major push at that point to convert hryvnia into rubles, and you can already see this is not disputed that Ukrainians are now moving into Russian-controlled areas because they're, attracted by the ruble zone, and of course the Russians are talking about paying salaries in areas of Ukraine that they control in rubles. At that point, it makes no economic sense any longer for Ukrainians. Economic sense, I stress. I mean, there may be other factors, but it makes no economic sense for Ukrainians not to want to convert fully into rubles and to just change the entire structure of their economy.
Follow the money. You go to where the money
Follow,
is.
you go
And
where
if the
the
money
money
is like five kilometers south, if you're in Zaporozhye area and it's 5 kilometers south to Kherson,
you go there.
You go there.
You go there, and in fact, we've already seen evidence of people moving into places like
From CNN.
Exactly, CNN. And of course, the spin given, that they're going in to do all sorts of things, take out their families. But as has been pointed out, if you're going in there with vast piles of belongings and bringing your pets with you,
You're not
then
coming
you're not logically intending to turn around and move back.
All right. Anything else, or should we leave this video
No,
there?
I think we can leave this video here. I mean, it's a darkening picture. I would add, by the way, that Zelensky, brief moment of clarity, he gave a broadcast in which, for the first time, he appeared to admit that things are going badly wrong. He talked about, that they're under tremendous pressure in Donbass, everywhere across the front lines, and he didn't seem to offer much hope of anything getting better.
Nope.
So if even Zelensky's talking like this, then, as I said, you can see that the situation is getting very grim.
All right. We will leave it there, everybody. The Duran shop, 10% off. Right there. Good day. That's the code. And the Duran.locals.com and Rumble, ODYSEE, Telegram, and BitChute is where you can also find all of our videos. Take care.